Our design team has created an alternative museum to the existing Nanjing Memorial Museum erected by the Chinese government in 1985 in memory of the 300,000 victims who lost their lives during the Nanjing Massacre. Although both memorials pay tribute to the Chinese who suffered the wrath of the Japanese Imperial Army in the 1930s, each memorial was created to fulfill different agendas: to incriminate the Japanese community with the compelling use of propaganda, and to fuel the generational hatred passed on, or to address our driving question of how space and design can be used to construct a meaningful and appropriate narrative about the Nanjing Massacre. As you enter the current Nanjing Massacre Memorial, situated on top of the mass grave site, containing the remains of numerous victims of the event, you are instantly greeted by the suffering figures of women and children. This was effectively able to invigorate pent-up emotions of the Chinese, and rather predictably sets up the tone for the remainder of the audience's museum experience. The information on display within the museum also helps influence the way in which individuality of the Japanese is distorted, and all atrocities are attributed to the Japanese community as a whole, even including the generation of today.
Our memorial is in response to the Nanjing Massacre that occurred in 1937, during which the Japanese raped, murdered, and plundered the city of Nanjing over a 6-week period. Our museum is situated within the Nanjing Wall, as it was the first point of entry for the Japanese into Nanjing. We intend for our memorial to begin by entering the tunnels of the wall and display the atrocities of the event without bias, and then follow with differentiating the Japanese soldiers from the entire Japanese populace. Instead of shaming the Japanese for what they've done, it instead attempts to dispel the controversy that the whole nation of Japan is to blame for this horrific event. By showcasing Japanese people that were innocent of the massacre or were against the actions of the event, such as Iwani Matsui, we hope to fix social conflict caused by this historical event between the Japanese and Chinese.
Our purpose is for the audience to leave the memorial with an understanding of the factualities of the massacre, and to recognize that the nation of Japan is not to blame, unlike the feelings of hatred that the current memorial instills. The driving message behind our memorial is that human kindness can be found in all groups, even those which as a whole it would be easy to condemn. This is a quote from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, in which he writes about what he learned about human nature as he survived the Holocaust. Through this quote, we want to show how even though the Japanese are easy to condemn for this event, there were outliers in the population that did not agree with the actions of their military. We have chosen to place our memorial within the Nanjing Wall, as it is the starting point for the battle. We are also able to utilize the existing tunnels of the wall as the audience goes into darkness to learn about the atrocities of the event. Museum goers are surrounded by rough, rocky walls, and as they walk through the museum with their knowledge growing, the rooms become lighter and more modern to contrast with the old walls. We intend to enlighten the audience and rid them of their past judgments toward the Japanese. The design of our memorial draws inspiration from our design motif, which is organic shapes. This is derived from the maple leaf, which is a symbol of love in both China and Japan. The incorporation of this motif into our architecture subtly enforces our meaning of how human kindness can be found in all groups of people. This is the entrance of the museum. The steps leading up to it and the ramp for disabled accessibility are part of the wall. The doors protrude from the wall and have a modern design that uses steel and red glass. By the doors are two small pockets with braille and translated text on them. These pockets are used to hold audio guides and pamphlet guides for visitors to use.
The entrance of our memorial is simply an introductory hallway which leads into our first room. This room uses the original rock walls of the Nanjing Wall. The information is displayed only on one side of the wall, with the other side being a rock. This is done to create a forced movement through this room because the audience has no other option but to look at the wall, because the other side is jagged rocks. The path also has sharp turns. This room is dark, jagged, and forced to create an uncomfortable atmosphere, as this room is showing the massacre and all the tragedies. This room does not contain our design motif of organic shapes, because the purpose of the organic shapes is to contrast with the wall, just as the good side of human nature contrasts the bad. The following room is circular with rings on the floor to create flow and movement and lead the audience around the room. The rings in the floor are indented and contain red lights, and then are covered by glass so the light softly glows on the ground. The rings also reflect the rings in a tree, which is part of our design motif of organic and natural shapes. On one side of the wall are the names of the victims of the massacre. This can also be seen in the current museum. We decided to include it as it effectively creates a visual of the amount of victims instead of simply a number. Seeing all the names listed out on the wall causes the gravity of the massacre to dawn down on the audience. On the other side are the frames containing glowing silhouettes of heads, in order to show how you cannot blame the entirety of Japan, but instead must focus on the individuals who actually committed the crimes.
Following the visual motifs laid out in the majority of our museum, natural and organic shapes representative of nature are clearly used in the layout and detailing of this particular room. As it had been reiterated before, in Chinese and Japanese culture, the maple leaf symbolizes love, and it has been integrated into the layout of the space with contemporary styling. However, this modern approach no longer contrasts strongly with the original Nanjing Wall, as this section of the wall portrays a transition from the somber and dark entrance of the museum, which depicts the atrocities, to the brighter and more modern room, highlighting the outliers within the Japanese, and how the country as a whole should not be blamed for the actions of a few. The color palette of this room is comparatively lighter, and the abstract leaf window that brings extra light into the room, shining a light on the less documented outliers of the Japanese community, whose efforts of condemning the events are seen by most as insignificant.
This portion of the exterior is inspired by the forms of a leaf. The edges of it are hard and jagged. This contrasts with the smooth and organic shape of the middle part. Just as the black beams contrast with the light glass, and just as the dark side of human nature contrasts with the good. It has a very unique curve that extrudes from the rectangular shape of the wall. While designing the memorial, we took into consideration energy efficiency. To limit conduction, the outside glass is made out of 2 layers of glass with a vacuum in between. Conduction is the transfer of molecular kinetic energy, or heat. It is transferred by particles colliding with each other, and this cannot happen in a vacuum since there are no particles. Another way molecular kinetic energy is transferred is through radiation. The glass on the exterior is heat reflective to keep out the solar radiation. Since the glass is resistant to radiation and conduction, the glass will not be hotter or colder than the surrounding space, therefore limiting convection. The second and third rooms are also energy efficient due to the foam insulation in the wall. This is because foam is a material with high R value, which means it is good at reducing the transfer of molecular kinetic energy through conduction. Reducing the transfer of molecular kinetic energy is important because it will keep the rooms warm in the winter and keep the museums cool in the summer, with less energy used on heating systems and air conditioners. The first room is made out of the original stone walls. This is intentionally not energy efficient because we want the museum goers to be uncomfortable while they learn about the atrocities. Therefore, no energy will be used to keep the first room either cold or warm.
A recurring obstacle that was encountered during the process of creating this museum was the construction of a narrative that would be told in this exhibit. As the concluding thesis of our museum draws inspiration from the philosophical works of Viktor Frankl, an Auschwitz survivor whose insightful experiences have gave birth to the book Man's Search for Meaning. This book regards suffering as a tool to further the purpose of life, and this somewhat belittles the horrific acts the Japanese committed in Nanjing during their invasion by concluding with an overarching message reading, "Human kindness is universal." Therefore, the issue of insensitivity towards the Chinese community often challenged us. However, by using this ideology to distinguish the perpetrators of the event from the condemned group of Japanese citizens, we were able to achieve a balance between controversy and truth, justice and reality, and hatred and understanding. With the use of design motifs and spatial awareness, we were able to convey a feeling of enlightenment and relief within our museum.